comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday study featuring Chairman Omali Yeshitela. My name is Akila Anai, the Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party, as well as your MC for this morning. Make sure to hit that like button and share this video on the platform that you're viewing from. This week, Chairman Omali Yeshitela continues a study on dialectical materialism. He will read from Materialism and the Dialectical Method by Maurice Cornforth, starting on page 38 with the subhead From Mechanistic to Dialectical Materialism. The study materials have been linked in the Facebook and YouTube descriptions for your benefit. For the first hour, the chairman will review the study materials, and in the second hour, we'll open it up to you, our live viewers, to ask your questions. It's my honor now to introduce our leadership, the leader of the African nation and the worldwide African revolution, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru. Thank you so much, Comrade Director Akile. Thank you so much for the introduction. I want to just express greetings to everyone who has come on to the study thus far this morning, and look forward to a fruitful discussion for the rest of this period. As has been said, we're looking at materialism and the dialectical method. We're at that point in the study now where we are making a distinction between dialectical and mechanistic materialism. We're saying that there is such a thing as mechanistic materialism as well, so that we like materialism and we think materialism, we understand materialism is to be the most significant means by which we method that we use for analysis, but we understand that there are different forms of materialism, and one of them is mechanistic materialism. And so we're going to start now on page 38 under the title From Mechanistic to Dialectical Materialism. So there's a distinction between mechanistic and dialectical materialism. This essentially is a discussion that helps to distinguish dialectical materialism from metaphysics. Dialectics is something that is defined in opposition to metaphysics, and materialism is defined in opposition to idealism. So we recognize that, but we also recognize that that there are various iterations of materialism, and now we're talking about mechanistic materialism. And this mechanistic materialism was really important as a development, but it is very it doesn't offer as the appropriate approach as does dialectical materialism. So starting on page 38, mechanistic materialism makes certain dogmatic assumptions. One, that the world consists of permanent and stable things or particles with definite fixed properties. Two, that the particles of matter are by nature inert and no change ever happens except by the action of some external force. Three, that all motion, all change can be reduced to the mechanical interaction of the separate particles of matter. And four, that each particle has its own fixed nature independent of everything else, and that the relationships between separate things are merely external relationships. Overcoming and passing beyond the dogmatic standpoint of mechanism, dialectical materialism holds that the world is not a complex of things, but of processes, that matter is inseparable from motion, that the motion of matter comprehends an infinite diversity of forms which arise one from another and pass into one another, and that things exist not as separate individual units, but in essential relation and interconnection. So I think that while this may sound complex on the one hand, as we move through this this chapter, we'll find that we will help to really clarify things. So things and processes. In order to find how the limitations of a mechanist approach can be overcome, we may consider, first of all, certain extremely dogmatic assumptions which are made by mechanistic materialism. These mechanistic assumptions are none of them justified. And by bringing them to the light of day and pointing out what is wrong with them, we can see how to advance beyond mechanistic materialism. One, Mechanism sees all change as having at its basis permanent and stable things with definite fixed properties. Thus, for mechanists, the world consists of individual, indestructible material particles which in their interaction manifest such properties as position, mass, velocity. According to mechanism, if you could state the position, mass, and velocity of every particle at a given instance of time, then you would have said everything that could be said about the world at that time, and could, by applying the laws of mechanics, predict everything that was going to happen afterwards. So this is mechanistic materialism that we're looking at. This is the mechanism. This is how it has the early European materialists dealt with the issue. This is the first dogmatic assumption of mechanism, but we need to reject it. That is to say, all things is having as its basis permanent and stable things with definite fixed properties. We have to reject that. For the world does not consist of things, but of processes in which things come into being and pass away. The world is not to be comprehended, this is a quote, as a complex of ready-made things, wrote Engels, but as a complex of processes in which things apparently stable, no less than their mind images in our heads, the concepts, go through an uninterrupted change of coming into being and passing away. This indeed is what science in its latest development teaches us. Thus, the atom, once thought to be eternal and indivisible, has been dissolved into electrons, protons, and neutrons. And these themselves are not fundamental particles in any absolute sense, i.e., they are not eternal and indestructible any more than the atom. But science more and more shows that they too come into being, pass away, and go through many transformations. What is fundamental is not the thing, the particle, but the unending processes of nature in which things go through, an uninterrupted change of coming into being and passing away. And nature's process is, moreover, infinite. There will always be fresh aspects to be revealed, and it cannot be reduced to any ultimate constituent. The electron is as inexhaustible as the atom. Nature is infinite, wrote Lenin. So just so, in considering society, we cannot understand a given society simply in terms of some set of institutions in and through which individual men and women are organized, but we must study the social processes which are going on, in the course of which both institutions and people are transformed. Two, the second dogmatic assumption of mechanism is the assumption that no change can ever happen except by the action of some external cause. Just as no part of a machine moves unless another part acts on it and makes it move, so mechanism sees matter as being inert, without motion, or rather self-motion. For mechanism, nothing ever moves unless something else pushes it or pulls it. It never changes unless something else interferes with it. No wonder that regarding matter in this way, the mechanist had to believe in a supreme being to give the initial impulse. But we need to reject this lifeless, dead theory about matter. This theory separates matter and motion. It thinks of matter as just a dead mass, so that motion always has to be impressed on matter from outside. But on the contrary, you cannot separate matter and motion. Motion, said Engels, is the mode of existence of matter. Motion is the mode of existence of matter. Never anywhere has there been matter without motion, nor can there be. Motion in cosmic space, mechanical motion of smaller masses on the various celestial bodies, the motion of molecules as heat or as electrical or magnetic currents, a chemical combination or disintegration, organic life. At each given moment, these individual atoms, each individual atom of matter in the world is in one or other of these forms of motion, or in several forms of them at once. All rest, all equilibrium is only relative and only has meaning in relation to one or other definite form of motion. A body, for example, may be on the ground in mechanical equilibrium, may be mechanically at rest, but this in no way prevents it from participating in the motion of the earth and in that of the whole solar system, just as little as it prevents its most minute parts from carrying out the oscillations determined by its temperature or its atoms from passing through a chemical process. Matter without motion is just as unthinkable as motion without matter. So far from being dead, lifeless, inert, it is the very nature of matter to be in process of continual change and motion. Once we realize this, then there is an end of appeal to the initial impulse. Motion, like matter, never had a beginning. The conception of the inseparability of matter and motion, the understanding that motion is the mode of existence of matter, provides the way to answering a number of perplexing questions, which usually haunt people's minds when they think about materialism, and which leads them to desert materialism and to run to the priest for an explanation of the ultimate truth about the universe. Was the world created by a supreme being? What was the origin of matter? What was the origin of motion? What was the very beginning of everything? What was the first cause? These are the sorts of questions which puzzle people. It is possible to answer these questions. So I want to look at that, but I want to just speak a little bit about some things that we said earlier on, that we read earlier on. And this is about mechanistic materialism and how there has been a kind of assumption that that matter is just existing as a process involving things and how at one point Europeans, and I'm speaking here of Europeans because this is basically where this particular assessment is coming from in terms of the discussion of dialectical materialism that we're entertaining right now. And basically we're using an understanding that has been influenced by, fundamental studies that were designed to solve questions that problems that existed in European society for its development and movement forward. And so this whole notion of matter, of the world being a complex of different things that's sort of acting upon each other, sort of like if you look at a pool table and you have the balls just bouncing against each other and hitting against each other, putting the other in motion or putting several in motion, but they never attain a capacity from this perspective they never have their own motion contained within them. And so the only thing that we're looking at is these things bouncing against each other in the world. And this is how mechanistic materialists apprehended or understood the world at a particular time. But we're saying something different. And that real understanding of dialectics helps us to understand that that's not exactly what it is that we're looking at. And that how, when we look at some of the same forces, including Marxists, when trying to understand the nature of laws of society, and we talk about how dialectical materialism, when applied to the investigation of society, is characterized as historical materialism. And something fundamental did change that we're going to be talking about a lot. And it's not just entities running into each other, like somehow people understand society and development of society. For example, we have a situation where Europe does attack Africa and attack much of the world. And from the perspective and it created what we call a separate mode of production, a different mode of production. It changed this feudalism that existed, this feudal mode of production that existed inside Europe into something else. And that's really important to understand, because it's not just Europe running into Africa, running into Asia, running into what we now call the Americas, and then you just have Europe and white people and white power dominating over these other entities that's out there. Something else happened. And so I wanted to talk about that briefly. And to do that, I've gone to the political report to the Sixth Congress, Uneasy Equilibrium, wherein we discuss the theory of African internationalism. And one of the weaknesses that we have with Cornforth and many people who involve themselves in discussion of dialectical and historical materialism is that they accept the method of investigation and analysis, which we characterize as dialectics and materialism. They characterize the method as the solution. But what I mean is that they often, when they talk about, and as Cornforth does, dialectical materialism, he speaks of it as a philosophy and not as the method of investigation and analysis, which would lead someone to certain philosophical conclusions based on that. And this is the problem, because if you start off with dialectic, the method of investigation and analysis being the solution, then what has to happen is that you end up like so many Marxists and others do, concluding that everything that Marx said was correct, using the method. Everything that Marx concluded using the method of investigation is the way forward all the time. And what we're saying is we use this method of investigation and analysis, and we didn't come out as Marxists, we came out as African internationalists. And African internationalism leads us to some different conclusions than what has happened with the Marxists. And for example, I want to say this is a conclusion that we've come to regarding society and where we are now, regarding the movement from European feudalism to what is characterized as capitalism today. And so looking at uneasy equilibrium and at the question of which is the political report into the Sixth Congress, and this particular chapter is also reproduced for the Seventh Congress Vanguard, and it's on African internationalism. This is the philosophy of the African People's Socialist Party. And here we say, using the method of investigation and analysis that we're discussing now, that our party and movement were forced to conclude that all humans, including Europeans, are trapped by an absolute necessity to secure and develop the means of subsistence. This is the process that we're talking about. In other words, the primary motivating factor in human society is the production and reproduction of life. Without life, all other questions, religions, culture, genetics, etc., are moot, meaningless. Indeed, culture is a byproduct of the process of conducting and of producing and reproducing life. However, the process of Africans producing and reproducing life was drastically disrupted and altered by the European attack that resulted in the capture and colonial enslavement of Africa and Africans. This attack by Europeans on Africa also resulted in the imposition of artificial borders that separate the dispersed African nation from our human and material resources and from a meaningful relationship among ourselves and with the peoples of the world. The material and human resources of Africa have gone to satisfy the requirements of life for Europeans at the expense of Africa and Africans. The process of Africans producing and reproducing life has not been primarily for Africa and Africans. It has been primarily for Europeans and the white world at our expense. This progenitor of world capitalism, the attack on Africa and Africans, along with the European assault on Asia and the Americas, rescued Europe and Europeans from an oppressive 1,000-year-long, disease-ridden, impoverished existence known as feudalism. This was the genesis of the capitalist system as a world economy, created on the base of the enslavement of Africans and others. So this is the genesis of the capitalist system. And it's important to make that statement, because although it is something that Marx admits to at a certain point in passing, he mentions this as a part of a number of things that gave rise to capitalism that undermines the significance of this reality. A scientific analysis of human society requires that we take a dialectical approach. We cannot see the world as static and ready-made. Society has to be analyzed as a process that is in a constant state of motion, change, and development. There's always something new arising to replace the old. And all social motion occurs in relationship to this process of coming into existence and dying away. Europe's attack on Africa was effectively an assault on Africa's ability to produce life for itself. This assault has had the effect of pushing Africa and Africans out of history, history being the summation of the ongoing process to produce and reproduce life. Slavery, genocide, and colonialism are the stuff of which capitalism was born. African enslavement was the first capital in the development of capitalism. The prevailing legal system, culture, religion, and general philosophical outlook or worldview constitute the superstructure of capitalism thus conceived. This superstructure is a natural product and reflection of this economic base of colonial slavery. Slavery and colonialism gave rise not only to capitalism, but also to the capitalist and working classes alike of Europe and North America, the workers and the bourgeoisie, the two primary capitalist defining classes, have occasionally fought great battles with each other since their inception as contending social forces. Nevertheless, both were born and developed on a platform of slavery and colonialism. Consequently, what is often called class struggle inside the US and Europe is actually contention among the workers and the ruling class for control of the parasitic capitalist pedestal and its stolen resources. The parasitic foundation of world capitalism continues to exist up to now as the true economic base upon which the entire superstructure of the capitalist-defined, capitalist-dominated world rests. The total existence of white people and their ability to produce and reproduce life is dependent upon this parasitic relationship that came into being with the attack by feudal Europe on Africa and the world. Here we are. This is where we get to the question of these balls on the pool table just cascading around, bumping into each other, etc. He says, instead of separate, more or less self-contained worlds existing in casual relationship to each other, there is one capitalist world system united by a parasitic economic relationship imposed by Europe upon the rest of us. There is therefore no European reality separate from that of Africa and the rest of the world. The entire world is now locked in a single dialectical process, a unity of opposites, whereupon the gruesome extraction of life and resources from Africa and the rest of the world is the condition for the life and so-called development of what we now know as Europe, white people, and the capitalist system to which we have been forcibly affixed. The legal system, culture, white sense of sameness, and political institutions are reflections of this parasitic economic base. Every white aspiration and dream, every expectation for happiness and a good life, from a successful marriage to a secure future for their children, requires drone strikes in Pakistan, police murders and mass imprisonment of the African colonies and barriers of the US, and starvation and forced displacement of the oppressed throughout the world. And so what we're talking here is actually taking what Marx understood to be the case, what the Marxists understood to be the case in terms of at least articulated as being the case, that we're looking at the world as not a conglomeration of things, but as processes, that we are investigating processes. And this is really important for us to understand. And so that's part of what point that we want to make in terms of an error that the Marxists and others great thinkers have made. And this is a consequence of a certain of a worldview that is not based on dialectics. Rather, it is a worldview that sees things as static and cannot recognize development when they seize it. And development was not simply something that happened to and for white people, It was something that happened. We had a situation where white people, Europe sort of developed in a process that impoverished the rest of us. It connected us into this new relationship. And it's a new relationship that has come into existence, a new process that was born out of the old process. So it's like the analogy that I've often used that, there takes certain ingredients to go into making like biscuits. And that includes salt and baking powder and baking soda and things like that. And when they first put the salt in, it's just salt with its own characteristic, and baking powder with its own characteristics, and the milk, a milk substitute with their own characteristics and what have you. But once you get the biscuits and do what has to do and heat it and cook it, you no longer have salt, milk, baking powder, and the rest of it with their own characteristics. You've got a whole new thing that has come into existence. This new thing is what it is that we're looking at. This new thing is what Europe has and Europeans have been unable to understand quite appropriately. And this is what African internationalism helps us to do. So we're no longer just looking at salt. And as we said, that we're no longer looking at the world as this different entities having some casual relationship to each other out there. A whole new process has begun. And this process is a colonial mode of production. Things are now produced not through feudalism. Feudalism is being pushed to the wayside, though you will find certain elements of feudalism continuing to exist in the existing social order, social system, but feudalism is not the fundamental mode of production that we're looking at, nor is capitalism the fundamental mode of production as has been understood to be. A new mode of production emerges through this relationship that we characterize as a colonial mode of production. And this is the mode of production ultimately that will prove to be the bridge to an actual socialism happening in the world. So anyway, we go back up to the bottom of page 40, and looking at that was a digression of sorts. And I've tried to stick that in there to make a point, and I don't know how successful I was in making that point. But it's really important because the way we've understood things and the way things have been taught to us in the past has come from the perspective and perception of the colonizer, of the dominant forces in the new social system that came into existence through colonial slavery. And so that's the world that was created. That's the world that where a dominant force now in this whole new relationship that has come into being, because Europe doesn't exist by itself. And Europe is, in fact, Europe is created during this process. There was no such thing as Europe when this process began, just warring tribes of different ethnics in this terrain that we now come to know as Europe. So I wanted to make that point. I'm still on the fourth from the bottom paragraph on page 40, where the conception of the inseparability of matter and motion, the understanding that motion is the mode of existence of matter, provides the way to answering a number of perplexing questions, which usually haunt people's minds when they think about materialism, and which lead them to desert materialism and run to the priests for an explanation of the ultimate truth about the universe. And this is more or less where we are, although the priests may not always wear collars and may not always carry Bibles or other kinds of religious material. That's where we are. When you can't find, when you see forces not being able to come to the best conclusions, when they use inappropriate or improper or inadequate means of investigation and analysis, then they end up having to discover some extraordinary kind of thing that made everything happen, and that made capitalism happen, that made white man happen, that made colonialism happen or functions the way it does, et cetera. What we're saying is a whole new entity has come into existence with the advent of the colonial capitalism. A whole new process was kicked off that locked the entire planet. Most of the people on the planet, certainly the most immediately dynamic forces, and partially because of relationship with each other, locked them into a different a mode of production that was global. It was born as a global system. So was the world created by a supreme being? What was the origin of matter? What was the origin of motion? What was the very beginning of everything? What was the first cause? These are the sort of questions which puzzle people. It is possible to answer these questions. No, the world was not created by a supreme being. Any particular organization of matter, any particular process of matter in motion has an origin and a beginning. It originated out of some previous organization of matter, out of some previous process of matter in motion. But matter in motion had no origin, no beginning. Science teaches us the inseparability of matter and motion. However static some things may seem to be, there is in them continual motion. The atom, for instance, maintains itself as the same only by means of a continual movement of its parts. So in studying the cause of changes, we should not merely seek for external causes of change, but should above all seek for the sources of the change within the process itself, in its own self-movement, in the inner impulses to development contained within things themselves. Thus, in seeking the causes of social development and its laws, we should not see social change as being brought about by the action of great men who impressed their superior ideas and will on the inert mass of society, nor as being brought about by accidents and external factors, but as being brought about by the development of the internal forces of society itself. And that means by the development of the social forces of production. Thus, unlike the utopians, we see socialism as a result not of the dreams of reformers, but of the development of capitalist society itself, which contains within itself causes which must inevitably bring it to an end and lead to the socialist revolution. So I want to look at this because here I think is where we find some problem. So say, thus in seeking the causes of social development and its laws, we should not see social changes as being brought about by the action of great men who impressed their superior ideas and will on the inert masses of society, nor as being brought about by accidents and external factors, but is being brought about by the development of the internal forces of society itself. And that means by the development of the social forces of production. And what we're going to see as we move forward, and certainly we can see this immediately looking at the political reports to the Congress and to our Congresses, and especially, but not exclusively, the 6th and 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. Because what we've seen is a movement from inside Europe, from what happened in Europe, dynamics within European society, what we now know as Europe, being in play. That included stuff like the social system itself that imposed poverty, that disease, oppression, those kinds of things combined into this social system where the nobility, the landowners, et cetera, dominated that society, and the majority of people functioning as serfs and peasants had to continuously provide resources for this dominant society. This was a mode of production that existed. And then, of course, something did happen that changed it. And what really needs to be understood is what changed this kind of existence. What is it that changed all of these forces who were out there contending out there in the world and combined them into a new process? And that's what we're looking at, a new process, not the end of processes, but a new process as a consequence of them coming together. We're looking at the development of the biscuit, so that you had these processes, these entities, processes that were out there, and then they were forced into a certain combination. And the outcome of this was a new process itself, just like most Europeans, or certainly most Marxists, are able to see that feudalism given rise to a new process, a new mode of production that they characterize as capitalism. What we're saying is that feudalism, out of feudalism, we see Europeans escaping from feudalism through colonialism. It was the capture of Africa and other places and peoples around the world that changed the nature of the society that Europeans lived in, that connected them and created the European, as opposed to the Celts and the Normans and the different kinds of ethnic groups that lived in that territory, experienced that territory. This is a whole process of developing something different out of this initial entity, and part of what that included was bringing Africa, Asia, and this entity that's now known as the America into this process. Now you have a biscuit. Now you don't just have Celts, you don't just have Africans, you have a whole new system that has come into being, and this is something that really must be understood. So now, when we talk about society and we're talking about forces of production, we have to understand this as forces of production. We have to understand this process of development as something that is contextualized by a whole different kind of relationship. When you think about, I think you're going to discover, even when you think about looking at what's happening now with this pandemic, when you talk about the new Omicron, or however it's characterized, and all of its features as a new iteration, they say, of COVID, and that may be the case. But ultimately, it may be that we're looking at this entity, this going through a certain kind of transformation that is possible that it turns even into something different, something new, that has certain of the ingredients that went into the initial thing that we call COVID. And it could be the same thing that we're looking, but there's this possibility of the emergence of a whole different phenomenon that has within it contains within it certain ingredients that was in COVID, and the different iterations of COVID that we've seen up to now. Anyway, I just wanted to, it's something to think about, and it's not that well worked out for the purpose of this discussion, but I hope it's helpful. So, I know I am impressed by this statement by Cornforth, when he says, thus in seeking the causes of social development as laws, we should not see social changes as being brought about by the actions of great men, who impress their superior ideas and will on the inner mass of society, nor as being brought about by accidents and external factors, but as being brought about by the development of the internal forces of society. The society has changed. And so the forces now are different. And this is something that the men of the Europeans cannot see, because of the place they're located is they see themselves as central to everything. So they can't see that something else has emerged, a different thing has emerged that has, and that increasingly moved us to a place where the critical significance of Europe and Europeans is something that's constantly in the process of being diminished. And we see the causes of social development as laws. We're not looking at social change being brought about not only by actions of great men, but of great white men, of great white people, of the colonizers. That's not where we have to look for social changes. But it's being brought about by the development of the internal forces of society itself. And society, if you look globally, means something quite different than what it meant when the Europeans were escaping from two Europeans, as they were locked in this feudal relationship that was based in what we now know as Europe. So thus, unlike the utopians, we see socialism as a result not of the dreams of reformers, not of idea of Bernie Sanders, of people in the Democratic Party who pose as socialists, and most of the so-called settler or colonial colonizers who characterize themselves as socialists and communists. We see socialism as a result not of the dreams of reformers, but of the development of capitalist society itself, which contains within itself causes which must inevitably bring it to an end and lead to the socialist revolution. And what is contained within the global capitalist society, or this whole social system, is the colonial contradiction. And this is the thing that this is the central cause that will inevitably bring the socialist revolution, because the destruction of colonial capitalism will come about as a consequence of the contradiction deepening, growing between the colonizer and the colonized. The fundamental social forces contained within the colonial mode of production. So the forms of motion of matter, this is important. The third dogmatic assumption of mechanism is the assumption that the mechanical motion of particles, i.e. the simple change of place of particles as a result of the action on them of external forces, is the ultimate basic form of motion of matter, and that all changes, all happenings whatsoever can be reduced to and explained by such mechanical motion or particles. And this is how even the Marxists understand things, and when it relates to what has moved from feudalism to what they call capitalism, the colonial question. It's not just this is mechanism, is the assumption that the mechanical motion of particles, the simple change of places as a result of the actions on them of external force, that's the ultimate basic form of motion. And that's how things are described in society by the colonizer, because the colonizer defines and understands herself as the central to everything, and so cannot understand and sees itself as the ultimate entity, and what happens otherwise is simply a change of place. It can't see itself a whole new social system being born through the contradictions inherent in this relationship between the colonized and the colonizer. Thus, all the motion of matter is reduced to simple mechanical motion. All the changing qualities which we recognize in matter are nothing but the appearances of the basic mechanical motion of matter. However varied the appearances may be, whatever new and higher form of development may appear to rise, they are all to be reduced to one and the same thing, the eternal repetition of the mechanical interactions of the separate parts of matter. This is mechanistic materialism. It is difficult to find any justification for such an assumption. In the material world, there are many types of process, which all constitute different forms of the motion of matter. But they can by no means be all reduced to one and the same form of mechanical motion. Motion, in the most general sense, wrote Engels, conceived as the mode of existence, the inherent attribute of matter, comprehends all changes and processes occurring in the universe, from mere change of place, right to thinking. The investigation of the nature of motion has, as a matter of course, to start from the lowest, simplest form of this motion, and to learn to grasp these before it could achieve anything in the way of explanation of the higher and more complicated forms. This is Engels, we just quoted. The simplest form of motion is the simple change of place of bodies, the laws of which are studied by mechanics. But that does not mean that all motion can be reduced to this simplest form of motion. It rather means that we need to study how, from the simplest form of motion, all the higher forms of motion arise and develop from mere change of place right to thinking. One form of motion is transformed into another and arises from another. The higher, more complex form of motion cannot exist without the law in simpler form. But that is not to say that it can be reduced to that simpler form. It is inseparable from the simpler form, but its nature is not exhausted thereby. For example, the thinking which goes on in our heads is inseparable from the chemical, electrical, etc. motion which goes on in the gray matter of the brain, but it cannot be reduced to that motion. Its nature is not exhausted thereby. The materialist standpoint, however, which rejects the mechanistic idea that all forms of motion of matter can be reduced to mechanical motion. This is the materialist standpoint, rejects the mechanistic idea. Let me go back. The materialist standpoint, however, which rejects the mechanistic idea that all forms of motion of matter can be reduced to mechanical motion, but must not be confused with the idealist notion that the higher forms of motion cannot be explained as arising from the lower forms. For example, idealists assert that life as a form of motion of matter cannot possibly be derived from any processes characteristic of non-living matter. For them, life can only arise through the introduction of a material system of a mysterious something from outside, a vital force. But to say that a higher form of motion cannot be reduced to a lower form of motion is not to say that it cannot be derived from the lower form in the course of the latter's development. Thus, materialists will always affirm that life, for example, appears at a certain stage in the development of more complex forms of non-living matter and arises as a result of that development, not as a result of the introduction into non-living matter of a mysterious vital force. The task of science in this sphere remains to demonstrate experimentally how the transition from non-living to living matter takes place. Thus, the mechanistic program of reducing all motion of matter to simple mechanical motion must be rejected. We need rather to study all the infinitely various forms of motion of matter and their transformations one into another, and as they arise one from another, the complex from the simple, the higher from the lower. In the case of society, no one has yet tried to show how social changes can be explained by the mechanical interactions of the atoms composing the bodies of various members of society, though to do so would be a logical culmination of mechanistic program. But the next best thing is attempted by the mechanistic theory known as economic determinism. According to this theory, the whole motion of society is to be explained by the economic changes taking place in society. All the determinants of social change have been exhausted when the economic process has been described. This is an example of the mechanistic program of reducing a complex motion to a simple form, the process of social change, including all the political, cultural, and ideological development to a simple economic process. But the task of explaining social development cannot be fulfilled by trying to reduce the whole development to an economic process. The task is rather to show how, on the basis of the economic process, all the various forms of social activity arise and play their part in the complex movement of society. So I want to just go forward. I know I'm moving really quickly, and because I do want us to, I don't want this to be an unending process. And I do expect that people who are participating in this study will yourselves investigate and continue to study what is being put forth here, to study what we providing from Cornforth on the one hand, and also the critique that we're making of it. Study the political reports to the African People's Socialist Party. Give particular attention to the study on African internationalism, or the discussion on African internationalism to be found in the 6th and 7th, to the political report to the 6th and 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. You must do this, and I think that it'll provide a tremendous amount of leadership and hopefully deepen our understanding of these questions that we're going over rather quickly. right now. So the last dogmatic assumption of mechanism is to be mentioned is that each of the things or particles whose interactions are said to make up the totality of events in the universe has its own fixed nature, quite independent of everything else. In other words, each thing can be considered as existing in separation from other things, as an independent unit. This is really, and this is the essence of so much how the white world understands things. This is how the colonizer understands things. This is a world that has come into existence as a consequence of European domination that constructed this new mode of production, this colonial mode of production, and and it cannot recognize the relationship that Africa, Asia, and the rest of the world has on it. It sees itself as this really critical central force defining the rest of the world. It cannot understand itself as being defined by this world as well. And that's why, it's not unusual to for this incredible thing that we see happening, the ability of the colonizers, just ordinary colonizers, ordinary white people, the inability of them to see a relationship between their well-being on stolen land, their well-being coming from domination of whole peoples. They can't see the relationship of their well-being based on expropriating value, life, culture, everything else from other peoples, and the state of existence of other peoples who are being robbed and looted and killed in the process. They can't. It's extraordinary how they are capable of not recognizing the relationship there. To explain their own wealth, their own well-being in this way. I mean, to the point, it's interesting the extent to which society goes to confuse itself, to undermine, to make sure that it doesn't come to the best conclusions. We've used the example, more than one occasion, the analogy of the Santa Claus phenomenon. This instance where this cherubic white guy lives in some place in North Pole or someplace where it's even too cold for meaningful labor to occur, and has these forces, the mythical, logical Santa Claus, Saint Nick, Father Christmas, however he's characterized in various places of Europe. So with the assistance of in this case of elves, non-humans who produce all this stuff and stores it on this magic sled that goes throughout the world, the white world, and delivering goodies to all of the good people. And it's the bad people who don't get anything. And it's an explanation, of course, of the wealth that you find consolidated in Europe. Wealth that has not come as a consequence of the European production of white people, of the colonizer producing it himself. It comes as a consequence of a very mysterious process where from another place where people don't work, but these non-people, these elves and what have you, put it all together and gives it to this, and for this white guy who delivers it to all around the world to the good people. And of course, if you don't get it, it's because you're not good. And the only way you can get it, of course, is to be good. And then who has all the stuff in the world except the white people, the colonizers? And this is, just a part of the process through which you see a whole society goes into blinding itself, confusing itself, obscuring the basis of and of its own wealth. And so this is, it's extraordinary. This is how this is how it works under colonial capitalist social system where the colonizer defines the world. So proceeding on this assumption, let me just go, the last dogmatic assumption of mechanism is to be mentioned is that each of the things or particles whose interactions are said to make up the totality of events in the universe has its own fixed nature, quite independent of everything else. In other words, each thing can be considered as existing in separation from other things as an independent unit. So the white people in this land that we call America stole everything, built skyscrapers, killed indigenous people, poisoned the waters, brought captives Africans here to work for them, etc. There is no relationship there to what white people have and there is no at the expense of anybody. It's just that white people have these things, and so you just got these different things and particles that with their own fixed nature. Africans are lazy, Mexicans are lazy, the indigenous people are lazy, etc. And white people, have these really brilliant characteristics that can utilize all the resources of the planet where the rest of us couldn't. And so each of us has these separate fixed nature. The brilliance and genius of white people, the ineptitude, sloth of the rest of the world, and that's just the way it is. So we are impoverished, and I'm reminded growing up as a child, the story of the ant and the grasshopper. I used to find quite disturbing, how the ant was this very, very busy entity that worked all the time and saved everything and had all kinds of resources, and the grasshopper, happy-go-lucky fellow. Not like the ant at all, actually taking time out to do other things with life other than working forever. And at the end of the day, of course, despite all of the warnings, the grasshopper lives this very frivolous kind of existence as opposed to the ant. And so when the winter comes, the grasshopper has nothing and starves to death, and the ant has everything that he needs and lives. And this is a story that, with a moral there representing the relationship that white people have to the rest of the world. And I've always found it extraordinary, even as a child, but that's how things are explained. So proceeding on this assumption, it follows that all relations between things are merely external relations. That is to say, things enter into various relationships, one with another, but these relationships are accidental, make no difference to the nature of the things related. And regarding each thing as a separate unit entering into external relations with other things, it further follows that mechanism regards the whole as no more. The whole is no more than the sum of its separate parts. According to this view, the properties and laws of development of the whole are uniquely determined by the properties of all its parts. So you don't ever have a biscuit, you just have the salt with properties and the baking powder with properties and the milk with properties, etc. So not one of these assumptions is correct. Nothing exists or can exist in splendid isolation, separate from its conditions of existence, independent of its relationship with other things. And the conditions of existence, so the whole capitalist colonialist system, the whole conditions of its existence connected to the ability to expropriate value, human and material value from those of us who colonize. If you move that, then you have no colonialism, you have no capitalism. So things come into being, exist, and cease to exist, not each independent of all other things, but each in its relationship with other things. The very nature of a thing is modified and transformed by its relationships with other things. When things enter into such relationships that they become part of a whole, the whole cannot be regarded as nothing more than the sum total of the parts. True, the whole is nothing apart from and independent of its parts, but the mutual relations which the parts enter into, the mutual relations which the parts enter into in constituting the whole, modify their own properties. So that while it may be said that the whole is determined by the parts, it may be equally said that the parts are determined by the whole. Once again, the development of science itself shows the inadmissibility of the old mechanistic assumptions. These assumptions have force only in the very limited sphere of the study of the mechanical interactions of discrete particles. In physics, they were already shattered with the development of the study of the electromagnetic field. Still less are they admissible in biology, in the study of living matter, with still less the study of men and society. So, Comrade Director, how are we?
Sure, Chairman, I think we can keep going until we get to page 46.
Okay, page 46, thank you. Okay, when we bring into the open and reject these assumptions of mechanistic materialism, then we begin to see the need for a materialist doctrine of a new type, a materialism which overcomes the weaknesses and narrow dogmatic assumptions of mechanism. But I want to say that I hope I've suggested in this that even Marxism, as is put forth and understood, can be considered mechanistic in the sense that it was not able to recognize the new phenomenon that came into existence with colonial slavery. It was able to see slavery as something that happened, and it's able to see colonialism as something that happens, but it cannot see the emergence of a whole new process now with this dialectical relationship, wherein there is a new unity of opposites. So we don't just have slavery, we don't just have colonialism, we have the colonizer and the colonized. We have the slave and the slave master. We have a unity of opposites. We have a new kind of relationship that brings the two of the different factors together into a single process. And that's the new thing that even the Marxists have not been able to understand, even as they talk to us about dialectical materialism, which is why it's always problematic to see dialectical materialism as the philosophy, as opposed to seeing dialectical materialism as the method of investigation and analysis that gives us the ability to come to some kind of scientific philosophy. This is a profound weakness of the whole Marxist. I'm saying Marxist because people have attributed their conclusions to Marx. I'm not sure Marx did this, but this is the fundamental weakness because it no longer requires investigation because what has been characterized as historical materialism necessitates the conclusions that Marx has come to about each stage of human development. While it's extraordinarily significant in terms of the means of investigating laws related to human development, this whole concept, much of what we understand and has been characterized as dialectical materialism, or historical materialism, is tainted because of that situation where the colonizer has placed himself in the center of the world and sees the world as a complex of ready-made things. And so we say when we come, I'm going back to Cornforth near the bottom of the page, when we bring into the open and reject these assumptions of mechanistic materialism, then we begin to see the need for a materialist doctrine of a new type, a materialism which overcomes the weaknesses and narrow dogmatic assumptions of mechanism. This is dialectical materialism. So the other thing that we're seeing is how philosophy is not free from society. It is born of society. It is born of a society explaining itself, explaining its presence, its place and destiny in the world. That's where philosophy comes from. It's not conferred upon human beings from some external force out there, etc. That's why once we have this method of investigation and analysis that we call dialectical or historical materialism, then we can utilize it to investigate the world, and we can compare what it is that conclusions we've come to with the conclusions others have come to. And we recognize that this process of investigation and analysis is a very scientific process. But just because it's scientific doesn't mean that it's applied appropriately in every occasion. It just means it's scientific. And sometimes you will be able to come to good conclusions. You will come to good conclusions when you use it appropriately, and bad conclusions when you don't. There's old saying that practice makes perfect. We say perfect practice makes perfect, because you can practice the wrong thing forever and you never will be perfect at anything except being wrong. So that's part of what it is that we're looking at. So we say dialectical materialism understands the world not as a complex of ready-made things, but a complex of processes in which all things go through an uninterrupted change of coming into being and passing away. Dialectical materialism considers that matter is always in motion, that motion is the mode of existence of matter, so that there can no more be matter without motion than motion without matter. Motion does not have to be impressed upon matter by some outside force, but above all, it is necessary to look for the inner impulses of development, the self-motion inherent in all processes, Dialectical materialism understands the motion of matter as comprehending all changes and processes in the universe, from mere change of place right to thinking. It recognizes, therefore, the infinite diversity of the forms of motion of matter, the transformation of one form into another, the development of the forms of motion of matter from the simple to the complex, from the lower to the higher. Dialectical materialism considers that in the manifold processes taking place in the universe, things come into being, change, and pass out of being, not as separate individual units, but in essential relation and interconnection, so that they cannot be understood each separately and by itself, but only in their relationship and interconnection. In dialectical materialism, therefore, there is established a materialist conception far richer in content and more comprehensive than the former mechanistic materialism. We say in African internationalism, therefore, there is established a materialist conception far richer in content and more comprehensive than the former mechanistic materialism that sometimes calls itself Marxism. So I'm going to stop there, I think. Is that right, Comrade Director?
Chairman, yes, it's a good place. For real. Chairman, I just want to really appreciate this study. I mean, breaking down this particular section was, I think, a little, at least for me, a little more complex, but you just really, you've really just laid it out bare to where it's really understandable. And just the whole thing of being able to, I mean, that's what we're studying, deepening our understanding of theory and understanding its significance, because you continuously break down their worldview, the colonizers' worldview, Maurice Cornforth's worldview as he's writing this document. So I just really want to appreciate the study, Chairman. This is opening up our Q&A section now, but before we get to your questions, we are going to take a moment, a pause for some announcements. So let's get those up on screen and tell you what's going on in the African People's Socialist Party and the Euro movement. And engineer, that's you. Okay. Okay, there we go. All right. So this study is being brought to you by the Department of Agitation and Propaganda, where we're winning the war of ideas. For your worldwide revolutionary news and analysis, you can visit theburningspear.com. And we encourage everyone watching today, if you are not already subscribed to the Burning Spear newspaper, get a 1-year subscription today. 12 issues delivered straight to your door for $25, or the digital edition delivered to your email inbox. Get a combo of both for 20% off, and you can also gift a subscription to comrades and family members and donate to sponsor prisoner subscription. You can do all of this at theburningspear.com/subscribe. Next. Calling on Spear distributors, the December Spear is here. If you haven't purchased your bundle, order now. Also, the Spear turns 53 this month, 53 years old this month. So get the Spear out in your community and go to burningspearmarketplace.com to order your distributor bundle. Next. Omali Taught Me airs on Black Power 96 FM radio, a project of the African People's Education and Defense Fund with the slogan, not just explaining the world, but changing it. Listen on 96.3 FM in St. Petersburg, Florida, or streaming online at blackpower96.org. And I encourage you right now, if you have your mobile device in your hand, go to your Google Play Store or your Apple App Store and download our app. Listen to us no matter where you are in the world. Download the Black Power 96 mobile app. Next. The theory of African internationalism is a theory of practice. All the energy of the African People's Socialist Party is focused on the destruction of colonial capitalism. Africans of the world, go to our website, apspuhuru.org, and fill out our contact form. Give the gift of African internationalism. Visit burningspoonmarketplace.com for books and literature by Chairman Omali Yeshitela and other Uhuru movement leaders. I saw a question in there asking, what books do you recommend? And Chairman mentioned a few, An Uneasy Equilibrium and Vanguard, The Advanced Attachment of the African Revolution. And there are so many other works by the chairman and Uhuru movement leaders. Check out the pamphlet section with reissued and vintage pamphlets, including The New Period and Smash Slander, which have been discussed in previous Omali Taught Me studies and Report from the Mountain. These are critical African internationalist texts that are still relevant today. Check out the new Thinking About Uhuru hat and stock up on your African flags. Go to burningspearmarketplace.com to shop all of this, burningspearmarketplace.com. If you are in the Oakland/San Francisco Bay Area, come to the Uhuru Furniture Warehouse sale today, December 5th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., taking place in the beautiful Aquaba Hall at 7911 MacArthur Boulevard in Oakland. This sale is a thank you for your ongoing support for African community economic development and self-reliance. Take 50% off the tag price of all furniture, lamps, rugs, mirrors, art, and collectibles. I need to get to Oakland. Plus, buy Black Power products will be on site and make great gifts, including the Burning Spear newspaper and Burning Spear Publications books, Decolonase, all natural hair and skincare products, Uhuru Planet Revolutionary apparel, t-shirts, and tote bags, and Uhuru pies will be on site with delicious, all natural, handcrafted, sweet and savory pies and cookies. And all purchases above $50 get a free Uhuru cookie, and all purchases above $100 get a free 4-inch Uhuru pie. Calling on all party and Uhuru movement members and supporters to attend the 2022 plenary conference of the African People's Socialist Party, February 11th through the 14th, 2022, themed Relentless, 50 years of leadership towards African redemption. Our plenaries and congresses have become the vehicles for an ongoing assessment of our work and the conditions in the world affecting our struggle for total liberation and unification of every square inch of Africa and the entire globally dispersed African nation. Registration for this 4-day virtual conference costs just $25. Read the full call to attend by Chairman Omali Yeshitela and register today by going to apspplenary.org. Like and follow the Lowezi Kinshasa like page on Facebook for more African internationalist political education. Secretary General Lowezi Kinshasa does frequent live events such as the War of Ideas series. He includes live sessions done in French. To get alerts of when SG Lowezi is going live, make sure to like and follow his page today. Uhuru Foods and Pies is hiring for a part-time baker in both Oakland, California and St. Petersburg, Florida. Culinary training is preferred. Join the work to build an independent African economy by baking for Black Power. To apply, email your resume to oakland.volunteer@uhurufoods.org or mail your resume to 7911 MacArthur Boulevard, Oakland, California, 94605, or call 800-578-5157 for more information. Uhuru Furniture and Collectibles in both Oakland and Philly are hiring full-time truck drivers and full marketing coordinators. Do you have driving and furniture lifting skills, social media and print marketing experience? Can you work Wednesday through Sunday? If so, apply for these positions and contribute your labor and skills to this institution of the African People's Education and Defense Fund. Every day, you can work with an amazing team and go home knowing that you're helping to build the independent African economy. Apply by visiting our website in Oakland, uhurufurniture.blogspot.com, and in Philadelphia, that's uhurufurniturephilly.blogspot.com. And on Tuesday nights from 9 to 10 p.m. Eastern, join Ralph Pointer on What's Happening Blog Talk Radio. Tune in by calling 347-857-3293. Ralph Pointer sits on the Black is Back Coalition Steering Committee and chairs the BIBC's Political Prisoners Working Group and also leads the Lynn Stewart Committee. And we are calling on people to follow the All African Peoples Development and Empowerment Project on Facebook or visit developmentforafrica.org for important information and helpful tips in regards to the colonial virus COVID-19. It was just mentioned this new variant, so it's really important for us to, be alert with this pandemic still in effect throughout the world. So APDEP has recently launched an international telehealth program, a free resource for African people to get our COVID-19 related questions and concerns answered by licensed doctors and nurses through Project Black On. You can make your free virtual appointment with one of their professional health providers by going to developmentforafrica.org/telehealth. And to keep up with our movement events, visit theburningspear.com's events page and subscribe to our mailing list. And last announcement, make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study, and support the Omali Taught Me show by donating now at paypal.me/Omali Taught Me. So that concludes our announcements for today. Thank you so much for your patience. And now we're going to get into the Q&A portion of our program. And of course, we want to acknowledge where people are viewing from. We have St. Louis, Missouri, Brooklyn, New York, Marion County, Georgia, Huntsville, Alabama, Norfolk, Virginia, occupied Azania or South Africa, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Richmond, Virginia, Portland, Oregon, Oakland, California, San Diego, California, Miami, Florida, Tampa, Florida, St. Petersburg, Florida, Chicago, Illinois, Fort Myers, Florida, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Jamaica, Hempstead, New York, and Pompano Beach, Florida, all tuning in with us today. So Chairman, we had one question from last week that we're going to take. This is from Comrade Jamal in Moorhead, Minnesota. Is there a dialectical analysis of the conditions in St. Pete and the movements, St. Petersburg, Florida, and the movement's involvement in the community prior to the Battle of St. Pete?
Uhuru, thank you, Comrade Jamal. I'm going to try and respond to that as accurately as I understand the question. The fact is that the African People's Socialist Party had done work either as the party or as precursors to the party, like SNCC and JOMO, for 30 years or so prior to the Battle of St. Pete. We were engaged in a different ongoing process of political work and raising up the colonial question throughout the community. And one thing that dialectics teach us is to be able to make a distinction between quantitative and qualitative change, and quantitative being a change in the degree of things, and something that faster, slower, hotter, colder, tall, bigger, smaller, that kind of thing, and that what we've come to understand is that the work, ongoing work of doing political education, mass involvement, taking out information to the masses of the people over a period of time. This is quantitative change. You can't always immediately see the consequences of quantitative change. It's like when you, an analogy that's often used when talking about dialectics, you put water on a stove to be heated, and initially the heating process is such that you don't see any changes at all until, and this is quantitative change that is occurring as the water is heating. And then there's a great leap forward when the water reaches a certain temperature, and then you have a qualitative change in that you're not looking at just water as a liquid, you're now looking at the water being transformed to a gas. That's a qualitative change. The gas, of course, being steam. And so, this analogy is that we do the work all the time. We explain to masses of people all the time. We sell the burning spear all the time. We do that kind of political work. We hold forums and other things. We intervene in different kinds of events, initiate demonstrations, etc. And this quantitative change, so where people's growth is occurring all the time, and to the point that there is a leap forward where people, for example, we work for months and months and perhaps even years, and have just a few people who would attend the meetings, and then not regularly happening, and then suddenly when this thing happens in the city, in this instance where the police kills young Tyron Lewis, gun him down in the streets, all the quantitative work we've done, all of the protests, all of the flyers we've passed out, all of the burning spears, all the meetings we've caused, have the quantitative change that we've been involved in, where you don't necessarily see the change, now takes a great leap forward, and masses then come into our movement and initiate this struggle. And that's been defined by us over a period of years and things like that. So, I mean, this is like a part of what we can see in terms of the dialectical approach. And I think it's really important because it helps us to understand that it is quantitative change that leads to development that we call qualitative change. It is that kind of change. I mean, when we say quantitative change, we're talking about a small, what do you call it? Caterpillar getting to be a big caterpillar. That's a quantitative change. But a qualitative change is when that caterpillar then turns into a butterfly. That's a whole new thing altogether. And that's the kind of work, when we do the work that that contributes to quantitative change, that's sometimes not visible. You can't even see it. But it's like if you put water on a stove, and there's nothing wrong with the container that the water is in, and the stove works properly, and you will a fire comes on it. You don't have to stand over the fire, the stove all the time, wondering and hoping that the water is going to heat, it's going to boil and change into the gas that we call steam. You can turn your back on it and go do something else until that water heats, because that's the way it works. And that's the kind of confidence we have to have in the work that we do now, when we go out with our newspaper, when we hold our meetings, when we engage in the protests, et cetera. As long as we maintain consistency in that process, it won't work if you it won't work right away if you turn the water off and then let it stay off for a while, a long period of time, and come turn it back on. You don't get the same kinds of conclusions. You don't get the quantitative kind of changes that's necessary for the qualitative big leap forward that will result in development. So that's how we've worked, and that's what makes it so important to have like really consistency of struggle movement, and to have the history of a revolutionary party such as the African People's Socialist Party, because we are engaged all the time in heating the water. We're not off and on. We're not, we've existed now for 50 years, and that's part of the significance of the African People's Socialist Party, because we've kept the stove lit. We've kept the water in the container. We've kept the process moving. So we're not in the situation of beginning anew every time something happens. And so, yeah, I mean, that's the best I can do, Jamal, in terms of responding to the question that you just raised in the context of this discussion we're engaged in terms of dialectical materialism. Thank you, Uhuru.
Uhuru Jamal, thank you for your question, and thank you, Chairman. So moving now to the questions that have come in for today's study, which they are just rolling in. Our first question came from Comrade Director Tafari in Occupied Azania, and he asked, Uhuru, my question, why didn't the Arab invasion lead to the development of the capitalist economy? Is it because they didn't dominate the world, or is it because of internal factors that European invasion led to capitalism?
I can't answer that with any kind of certainty, Comrade Tafari, but I do know that what the Europeans did that seemed to make the major difference is that they did create a world economy. That they, as opposed to something that's located primarily within what would have been characterized as the Arab world that connected Africa to it, what Europe did was create a world economy so that you had the entire world linked into a single economic process. And this changed the whole world. So that affected the whole world and not just a particular place in Europe. As by the way, there was some evidence of some kind of capitalist type production participation in parts of Europe, and then in the Arab world as well. So that's I can't answer that more effectively than that, but I think it's probably worth a more investigation comment, Tafari. But I think the fundamental thing, though, that the fundamental difference is that Europe ended up creating itself in a whole world economy that involved the whole world. And so it was world trade in black bodies and other kinds of resources. A global economy emerged out of the process that Europe initiated with colonial slavery. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Director Tafari, for your question, and thank you, Chairman. Our next question comes from Comrade Ali in Oakland, California. Ali asks, Uhuru, Chairman, thank you for such a great study. I always learn so much. Capitalism is the global capitalist system that the world is locked into today because of colonialism. What was the global economic system prior to colonialism? Was it communism?
No, there was no global economic system. And that's part of what we're seeing is that the dynamic factor in terms of creating a global economy was the colonial question. It was colonialism. It was Europe's colonial slavery that tied the whole world into a single dominant economic venture, if you will, or project, or it was a mode of production now that you could say was a world mode of production. And that was what European slavery is sort of what I was responding to from Comrade Tafari, that this is the thing that gave rise to the world economy, to one dominant economy, the central economy, around which all other economic activity revolved. Uhuru. And because of that, the African Revolution is located in such a place that it resolves what has been an outstanding question that's been put forth by communists, Marxists, and others about the contradiction of trying to have socialism or communism in one country, the assumption that you can just do communism in one country, and that's, the vulnerability of Cuba. We've seen what's happening with the Soviet Union, Russia, the Soviet Union. It can't happen in one country. And the thing is, the vulnerability of the colonial capitalist system is contained within the colonial question, and especially as it relates to Africa. But the whole capitalist system rests upon this colonial domination. And so what we see happening today in the world is this maturing situation where the colonized are engaged in serious struggle against this relationship. That's what has thrust the United States and other European powers in this place of perpetual ongoing war in places like Syria and Afghanistan and Venezuela and all this, and in the ghettos and barrios and colonies inside the United States and other places like this. So the colonial question is the dominant question. There's no way you can get around that. And also it is the greatest evidence of the vulnerability of the social system because it was founded, if you will, created, if you will, on this colonial edifice that is a very shaky foundation, because every time a poor person stands up and tries to fight back in some way or another, it challenges the legitimacy of this system. And now that this is becoming universal in terms of people around the world fighting back, that's critical. And so the outstanding question before us, as it has been for the last 100 years or more, is the consolidation of a revolutionary party that is global, that can overturn the social system, a party from among the colonized. And central to that is Africa, because the African nation has been forcibly dispersed around the whole world, and all of our resources being stolen and our people being oppressed everywhere as a foundation for the whole colonial capitalist system. And then when you take the other peoples who are colonized by the system, who represent the majority of the people on the planet Earth, to the extent that we can build relationships, revolutionary relationships, to overturn the entire system, to the extent that the working and toiling people in these other countries can be won to overturning these systems, then we've got the formula for the destruction of colonial capitalism and the emergence of communism, which is a society where nobody is exploited, nobody lives at the expense of anybody else, and then everybody who can will participate in producing life, and everybody who must will receive what it is necessary in order to live. Uhuru, I hope that was helpful, Comrade Ali.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Comrade Ali, for your question. Our next question is from Comrade Demetria in Portland, Oregon, who asks Uhuru, Chairman, can you explain how African internationalism is the only way to cut this capitalist parasitic system off? Can you explain why colonizers have always controlled the world they created, and it's vital for them to recognize why they have their lives and lifestyle?
Well, it's necessary. I respond to that in part to the responses to Comrades Ali and Tafari before you. And our responsibility is not to educate the colonizer and understanding what is necessary for them to understand, but is to educate and organize the colonized, because that's the fundamental question. That's the linchpin to everything. And then, of course, when you have a system that comes into existence, a whole social system, then you will find that the leadership in that society of the whole system is represented by the leadership in that society. It determines virtually everything and how everything is understood. It creates apparatus that's called a state. It's the colonial state that we're talking about. And as it was born as a colonial state, a global state entity, even though it was not always officially consolidated in that fashion, but you will see various kinds of treaties and things like that over a period of time where Europeans were fighting over who was going to have even made wars over parts of the globe in terms of consolidating power and the domination of the rest of us. Then you have the emergence of this armed capacity, this military force, and they even create laws and treaties and things like that to regulate the relationships between the oppressed and the oppressor, and the relationship between the oppressors themselves in the process of oppressing the rest of us. And so this is where the power lies, and the power is in the gun. The power is in their capacity to oppress, to kill, to jail, and to create laws and things like that that they can hold us to by virtue of having a military capacity to do so. So I don't know, Comrade Hester, if that was helpful at all, but that's how we understand that. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Demetria, for your question. Our next question comes from Comrade Asa in Occupied Azania, who says, Uhuru, Chairman, given the inability for things to exist in isolation, is that the reason why we say race is metaphysical, because it does not see human relations in the real struggle to produce life?
Well, we say race, not so much as metaphysical, as we talk about metaphysical as opposed to dialectical, meaning static and what have you. And perhaps that's what was implicit in Comrade Asa's question. But certainly race is an artificial thing that was thrown in the mix by the colonizers, because it takes us away. It's an explanation it is a metaphysical explanation in the sense that it locks human beings into this place where it has been predetermined by the nature of the races, something to that effect. When the real question is the political and economic relationship that's imposed on the world by colonialism. And people can get fixated on this issue of race and start fighting against racism and leave the question of the material, actual existing power, economic and colonial and political power untouched. In fact, the fight against racism ultimately is a fight to perfect the colonial system, because it leaves the question of colonial domination, economic extraction, value from Africa and other people untouched. The question is how people are treated in the process of the colonizer continuing to extract value, or how people are thought of in the process of the colonizer continuing to extract that value. So instead of fighting against colonialism, we fight against racism, which is a byproduct of a colonial relationship. It is a byproduct, it's part of the superstructure of a whole economic base founded on extraction, forced extraction of value from Africans and other peoples around the world that are colonized. Chairman Asa, I hope I spoke to your to your question. If not, put something else in there. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Asa, for your question. Comrade Timba in St. Louis, Missouri asks, Uhuru Chairman, really appreciate this study. What is the weakness of those organizations and groups who fight the individual ingredients of colonialism, such as racism, police terror, unemployment, terrible healthcare, etc.?
Well, I just spoke to that comment, Timba, because what we're looking at is our efforts to improve colonialism. It's like efforts to actually make colonialism more endurable. It is similar to the actual thing about legalizing marijuana and stuff like that. So that slavery becomes something that is more endurable. It's an ideal. That's even that represents the question of relationship between materialism and idealism, because we suffer and the oppressed suffer more, colonized everywhere. And the way out of this suffering, of course, is to pick up the resources, the weapons, and ideological, political, and other forms to overturn this relationship that we have with colonialism, which is painful. It hurts us, it harms us, it humiliates us, it kills us at early in our lives. It kills our children and things like that, and it puts us in prisons everywhere all the time. So to deal with that, we have the option of prayer. We have which is one of the easy things that's offered to us by our oppressors, including those lick spittles in our own community. Pray over it, pray for it, and that kind of thing, which is a form of idealism, as we know. We have that, and we have and which, by the way, Karl Marx, I think, referred to as the how did he characterize it? Religion being the opiate of the oppressed, or something to that effect. Or we have drugs, and so now as the contradiction to society of the world gets deeper and deeper in the United States, they say, okay, everybody can get high legally now. You can get marijuana, you can be on drugs. They at the same time they're telling you to do this, they are also saying you can't demonstrate against your oppression, that you can't vote, you can't do all this other stuff, but you can get high so that it becomes tolerable, oppression becomes is tolerable. So that's kind of what it is that we're looking at, Comrade Timba. People are being misdirected, and that's the danger of it. And that's the significance of the work we do. And this is part of the reason that we have certain kinds of problems, because people accuse us of trying to take away their right to get high, their rights for marijuana, their rights to do all these other kinds of things that covers for and obscures, if you will, the oppression of our people. And our objective as the African People's Socialist Party is to be engaged in a relentless battle, a war. We recognize that it does exist for the redemption of Africa, for our people, globally, and that takes a scientific approach, and that's what we have to have. The other thing I want to say in terms of a scientific approach is that we don't have time. I don't care how romantic someone may, romantically attached that someone may have to various kinds of idealistic aspects of our lives, various superstitions and things like that. We don't have time for it. We've got too much to do. We've got diseases to cure. We've got infrastructure to build. We've got to chase the oppressor out of Africa. We got to kill or chase the oppressor out of Africa to make a whole different kind of system. So we are obviously and reasonably impatient with the notion that we should tolerate various kinds of superstitions. And that's not to say that we are dogmatic in attacking, like ordinary African people, but we are capable of attacking those people and those forces whose purpose is to obscure our oppression, like the charlatans, like the sharptons, and the crumbs and the other forces like this. They function as forces who are thrust into our community to obscure the nature of our oppression, to give the impression that the oppression of our people can be ended by making white people like us, and by making America really wonderful the way it's supposed to be. Like, how can you have a wonderful, how can you have something that's supposed to be wonderful when it's based on committing genocide against the indigenous people here, where people are still locked in concentration camps called Indian reservations, where Africans who were brought here and enslaved and imposed, had the worst kind of torture and brutality imposed on us, where the rest of the world lives under permanent fear of drone strikes and things like that. And then somehow we are supposed to be engaged in making existence here tolerable. And that's not the African People's Socialist Party. And we haven't existed for the last 50 years in order to create a tolerable kind of oppression, a gilded cage, if you will. Our objective is to destroy slavery in every aspect of it, and to be able to expose those who are in our midst, who come to mislead and misdirect the people, and sometimes in the name of being communists, Black communists, or any other force like that, or social democrats, etc., to expose it. Not because we don't like people who call themselves by certain names, but because we recognize that what they are doing is obscuring the fundamental contradiction of that we are confronted with, and therefore retarding the ability of masses of people to be brought into active political life to overturn our oppression. Uhuru, Timber, a long question, long response.
Uhuru, Chairman. Well, I really appreciate it, and thank you, Timber, for your question. And we are getting winding down in time. There are still several questions, so I'm going to try to get to at least this one, which is coming from Comrade Sandra in Washington State, who asked Uhuru, Chairman, with colonialism being the mode of production that gave birth to the current world economy and remaining the largest, most significant method of production and means of wealth accumulation for the white colonizing class, does the concept of capitalism even have any real meaning? It seems like nothing more than the involvement of the colonizers in administrative or middleman roles in management and defense of colonialism.
Well, that's a really important question, Comrade Sandy, and that's something that we are really looking at. Sometimes it takes us a while to get around and beyond certain concepts that the world has been trapped with for a period of time. I say trapped just in the sense that there's a kind of what do you call it when inertia, ideological inertia that. Even sometimes you move beyond a particular understanding. So that's a really important question, because, to define the world and to provide primary contradiction in the world, the way it has been up to now, revolving around what has been characterized as capitalism, is to define history as it made a certain introduction, as it imposed itself in a certain way, on a certain sector of the human family, and that was in Europe. And of course, in Europe, where they had experienced the benefit of tremendous accumulation of resources, that's called capital, through colonial slavery, et cetera. So what is the most critical question that we're dealing with? The capitalism that came as a consequence of this theft of resources, or the process of the resources being stolen and maintained. And that's why we've said colonial capitalism as opposed to simply talking about capitalism, because we say colonial capitalism, we think contained in that is a greater, more significant definition of the reality that's imposed on us. So, and if that's what we've characterized as parasitic capitalism up until now, for long periods of time, parasitic capitalism, and people say, yeah, we know capitalism is parasitic because Lenin said that in order for imperialism is when capitalism has become parasitic, among other things. We say capitalism was born parasitic. It came into existence through this colonial question. This is where all these resources were captured to transform the mode of production that existed in Europe, and that extended the power and authority of Europe and this social system throughout the world. So I hope that was a meaningful response, Sandra, but it is a really important question and something that I've been dealing with for a while now, just considering that same question. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Sandy. Well, that was a great question. Thank you. And thank you, Chairman. So let's see, we're going to go to Life in Tampa, Florida, who asked, Uhuru, Chairman, what, if anything, did Marx say about colonialism?
Uhuru, Life, thank you very much. First of all, I just want to say that that's an important question. And I invite everybody to investigate that. You can look for that, but I can tell you that for the longest period of time, Marx was ambivalent around this question, or non-concerned with it, or its concern. His concern had to deal with what he saw as slavery. He did recognize slavery did happen. He did recognize that the land, that the indigenous people in the Americas were victimized by the process that gave rise to capitalism. And he was born as a, kind of aristocracy, into a kind of aristocracy in Germany, and had similar experiences that most of the colonizers did have at that moment in history. And certainly he would have come to different conclusions, I think, if the question of colonialism was something that was high on his agenda than what he did come to in terms of what it would take for the destruction of capitalism. And he saw the destruction of capitalism as being centered in how capitalism, quote unquote, articulated itself among Europe and the civilized countries, et cetera. I know that in 1907, in the Stuttgart conference during the Second International, where communists of the world were in Stuttgart, Germany, at a meeting, and a question arose about the colonial capitalism, about in response to a resolution to oppose the whole communist movement, to oppose colonialism, and people who quoted Marx were for continuing colonialism because of what colonialism supplied to Europe in terms of resources, in terms of places for excess populations to be sent to, and that kind of thing. And they instead said that they wanted to fight for a communist colonialism as opposed to a capitalist colonialism. But of course, there were others who argued in opposition to that position, who also quoted Marx. So obviously there was a bit of ambiguity among Marxists, or opportunism and dishonesty. But the whole question, there's one of the problems that the communist movement has been trapped with for long periods of time because of an inability to see that the entire system that they benefited from had its origin in colonial slavery. And so they had the ability to seek for solutions that did not require the destruction of colonial slavery. It allowed Europe and Europeans and white people to see development in Europe, for lack of a better term, not as a consequence of resources being stolen from everybody else, but as a consequence of their own genius. And this is how Europe wrote history. Europe told the story. And this is a consequence of a superstructure based on an economic base of colonial extraction, colonialism, et cetera. So who was that responding to?
That was Life.
Life. So yeah, like obviously he was not that clear and absolute around the question as what we are. And you know, you're talking about Marx having been around and alive while some of the great revolutionary struggles of the world was happening against slavery. You know, when Nat Turner and Denmark Vesey and people, Africans throughout Haiti, you know, were engaged in incredible struggle that was shaking the whole foundation of the capitalist system. And so there was plenty of opportunities to weigh in on those kinds of questions. And I haven't seen much evidence of that having occurred for her life.
Uhuru, Chairman. So we're going to take just one more question before going into close. And I'm just asking this question just because it makes more sense to do it now.
And I want to say, just in the event that something happens, that the power just went out where I'm located, but it's all right. But let's go ahead and deal with it. That if we should get this, it's back on. Okay, go ahead, Cameron.
Okay, I was wondering why your face disappeared. Okay. So the last question we're going to take is coming from Matsamela in San Diego, California, who asks, Uhuru, Chairman, is Tafari's question helpful in us thinking about the difference between what we are identifying as colonial capitalism and other forms of imperialism and colonialism that might have precluded colonial capitalism?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't think I understand that question. And I'm sorry, comment Matsamela. I don't think I understand that question. And I'm speaking to my own ineptitude more than anything else, because we know Matsamela is one of the scholars among us, and I'm not. Well, Matsamela is making the point about Roman being imperialist or something to that effect, Romans, and I don't know how that relates to what is being discussed. What we are talking about now is the advent of the kind of social system. We acknowledge the fact that there is a profoundly significant social system that most of us are locked into at this moment in history, and we acknowledge that. So we're not trying to say that all the evidence and instances of oppression, exploitation was the same. There are people who say to us all the time, well, you know, you're not saying anything about the Arabs did to Africans, et cetera, and why aren't you attacking that? And the fact is that the Arabs no longer have that kind of influence, and themselves are victims of a world economy. It is a existing world economy, existent world economy that we are in contention with, and which is why we don't ignore the fact that, excuse me, the Arab, the trans-Saharan trade in African people that went on for something like 1,500 years, longer than the transatlantic slave system. But it was different in the sense that the transatlantic system resulted in the existing of a global economy, world economy that we've spoken to, we've addressed, we've inferred early on in this discussion. And that's the thing that we are fighting against, this world economy, how it came into existence, right? The one that we are dealing with now, not whether or not there was oppression, exploitation that happened other times and other places, et cetera. So I think that's a critical difference that we're looking at, if I understand what Comrade Matsamela is raising, and possibly Matsamela is correct in assuming that part of what Carmen Asa was talking about is in that category as well. But the main thing is that there is an existing social system. It has an origin that we can identify. We can deconstruct this sucker and create a whole different world. And in that social system, part of what makes it important of where people are being oppressed and exploited are also Arabs. and people who call themselves Muslims and by various other names, etc. They are also part of this. And if we don't understand that we are dealing with a specific kind of social system right now, we don't have the ability to unite with and enlist a relationship with all those other people who suffer from this existing social system. So we pick a fight, for example, with Arabs in Northern Africa. We leave untouched the African petty bourgeoisie all over the continent of Africa and the world, et cetera. We just picking the wrong struggles because we haven't been able to identify the primary or the main contradiction that we are dealing with is with oppression, the relationship of oppressed and oppressor nations, this thing that came into existence right now with the rise of colonial capitalism at the expense of the freedoms of Africans and oppressed peoples around the world. This global economy we continue to deal with. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. And Matsubela did indicate in the chat that he said you answered that question that he was raising. So, Chairman, that brings us to the end of the study. I want to just go ahead and turn it over to you one more time for any closing remarks before we, wrap the whole thing up.
I want to thank you, Comrade Director, and I want to thank all of you for participating in this study, party members, Uhuru movement members, and everybody else who's been here. As you know, we are moving into the 50th year anniversary of the founding of our party. In February, we have a plenary that's going to be occurring, and we anticipate being able to deepen the understanding of our party in the whole world about colonialism as a mode of production. We think that's going to make a major leap in terms of how the world can struggle against this social system, and certainly how Africans and other colonized peoples around the world can do that. I want to thank everybody for being here, and party members and members of the Uhuru movement. I want to tell you now that we're going to have to dig in. We have a lot of work to do. It's an exciting period in history, and we have tremendous responsibilities that we have to fulfill in order to realize the emancipation of the people and all of Africans and all of the working people from this vicious social system that brings death and destruction and genocide. So thank you, Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. Again, I just really want to salute you in this profound study and your leadership over the last over 50 years, and also just through this particular study of dialectical materialism, which really is a study of African internationalism. So really just appreciate you, Chairman, in this study, and also want to unite with the chairman in saluting and appreciating all of you for being here in attendance to this Omali Taught Me Sunday study, and thanking you for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday study, and continue to support the Omali Taught Me show by donating to paypal.me/Omali Taught Me. If your question was not answered, don't worry, we will take it in the Q&A portion of next week's study. So just hold off, tune in with us next Sunday, and we'll get to your question. So we'll see you all next Sunday. Uhuru.